when I'm thinking about it being perfect or being good enough, that's usually me thinking a little bit more about myself than thinking about the person that's on the other end waiting to receive the gift of the message that I get to bring.
You're listening to Women Who Podcast with me, Alison Fraser, and it's our first podcast of 2024. I don't know about you, but I always start the year full of dreams and possibilities. And this year is no different. I have a bunch of things on my goals list, but none of them are what they used to be. I chose my guest for this episode because the new year is typically when we make big and bold decisions about all the things we're going to stop doing, rather than focus on what we can bring into our life. Alisha Carlson is the host of the Strong Her Way podcast. She went from couch potato to figure competitor, and now she lives somewhere in the middle. One of her deepest desires is to see the women she works with walk in freedom from food, the scale, and all the little lies they've believed about themselves. I couldn't have picked a better guest for this episode, so without further ado, here's Alisha Carlson. Welcome onto Women Who Podcast, Alisha Carlson, host of The Strong Her Way. So awesome to have you on this January where we're talking about diets, exercise.
Yes. Thank you so much, Allison, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you please tell us about your podcast, what it's about, and what led you to get started?
Yeah. So my podcast is called The Strong Her Way. It is like a fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle podcast, but I come at those topics through a non-diet lens. So that really was kind of birthed out of my own journey around fitness and exercise and just a deeper desire, I think, to really help women at a deep transformational level. And unfortunately, I think a lot of kind of the diets that we see out there, or a lot of the fitness and nutrition advice that's out there, is can be very like surface level, kind of solving things at a symptom, at that high level symptom, rather than really getting to the root cause. And so that's kind of is where that podcast was birthed out of, or why it's The Strong Her Way. And for me, I started the podcast, I think, back in 2020. And prior to that, I was writing blogs, and I knew that a podcast was something that I wanted to do. But for whatever reason, when I started looking into starting one, it just seemed like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so big. Where do I even get started? So I kind of put it on the back burner. And then 2020 came around, and I just had this epiphany where I'm like, I'm not really sitting around reading blogs anymore. I'm usually more listening to audiobooks and podcasts while I'm walking or working out or just driving around or throughout the day. And so I was like, okay, let's kind of look into this again. And I Googled a blog that really like walked it step by step. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is actually going to be so much easier than I thought.
What was it that struck you as being easier than you thought? Because I know a lot of people get hung up on, I need to have a studio and I need to have this, I need to have that.
Yeah, I think the article that I was reading, it just was like very step by step. Like, okay, you need to pick a podcast hosting site, and there are some that you can utilize for free. There are obviously going to be perks and benefits to upgrading to a paid platform in some instances, but so it's like pick a platform and then decide your name and then have something to record on, which I think initially I was just using GarageBand on my laptop to record. So seemed like very simple, very basic. And, and potentially maybe my brain was more ready to kind of receive it and go into podcasting as well.
That ties in nicely with diets and fitness, because sometimes we get into, I suppose, negative habits, and we need to be in the right space to change them.
Mm-hmm.
January seems to be a time when a lot of people like trying to make that clean slate. So in your experience, what have you seen every January in your audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to say that hopefully we're seeing kind of a shift away from January being like okay, like let's get gung ho and we're going to lose a bunch of weight and we're going to radically transform every area of our life. Because the reality is that January 1 could be any day of the year, right? It's kind of that whole concept of like starting over on Monday. Well, why wait? Like, why not just start with the day that you're given? But I would say, typically there is kind of a freshness or sort of this sense of newness that is waiting for us come January 1. It's like we're looking and we have the whole 12 months. And so I do think probably like culturally, we've been sort of conditioned to think that January 1, but really there's no magical thing about that particular date. So yeah, I would say typically people's motivations are probably a little bit higher, but I like to encourage you don't have to wait necessarily until January to get started.
Have you done anything yourself, like at the start of a new year when it comes to diet and fitness that you, looking back with hindsight, you wouldn't have done?
Oh my gosh, there's definitely not just one thing. I think, for so many years, I kind of fell into the trap of the whole New Year's resolution thing. And I think that I went into it very gung ho and like, okay, I'm going to start working out 6 days a week. I'm, going on this diet. This is what I'm doing. I'm cutting all of these foods out. And I think I tried to make really big changes all at once. And I was maybe able to maintain it for a few weeks, but then life kind of crept back in like it always does, or I wouldn't see results happening fast enough. Like I felt like the results that I was seeing for the amount of effort that I was putting in didn't seem to match. And so then I'm like, well, screw it. This isn't even working. And I'm kind of miserable right now. So let's just, this is obviously not for me.
So what would you suggest would be a wiser way of going about making changes in the new year?
Yeah. So I really like to walk my clients through, and this is a practice that I use. It's like, let's create a vision for your life. Like if you were to look out, next year or the start of, the next year, 5 years, 10 years from now, what do you see? Like what do you want your life to be like? How do you want to feel in your body? How do you want to feel in your life? So we really start to look at this bigger vision and what is it that you're wanting to create? How do you want to intentionally be living your life? And then we can break it down like what components, what pieces need to be in place in order for you to start living into that vision right now.
So it's a lot more a wider focus rather than you need to stop eating chocolate and
Yeah.
exercise 6 times a week.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, of course, we continue to break the actions down into really what I would consider like micro or baby steps, because those are going to be the things that are easier to do. And the more that we do it, the more confidence we have in our ability, the more momentum we create, the more motivated we end up feeling, rather than trying to bite off so much at once that it becomes overwhelming. It's maybe not realistic or sustainable for the rest of our lives. And then we start to feel like a failure because I wasn't able to make it to the gym 6 times last week. I could only go 4 because these other things happened. So, breaking it down to the smallest component also helps your brain not to freak out that you're trying to change too many things at once.
What's an easy baby step for us to get started with?
I don't know that there is probably just one easy baby step that I would recommend for everybody. The coach in me is like, would be to ask you questions, right? It's like if you kind of look at all of the lifestyle changes that you're wanting to make, which area feels like it is going to be the easiest to act on? Right. So for some people, they notice if they start making changes with nutrition, then sort of the exercise and the activity part comes along. For other people, they notice when they start working out, they naturally, their food habits kind of change a little bit because they're feeling good from exercising. And so they're wanting to continue to feel good based on the food that they're eating. So I would ask you, if you kind of look at your life in all the changes that you're wanting to make, what specific area feels like if you started working on this, this would sort of be the domino that kind of causes all these other changes to happen.
And I think that's something that everyone can have a good think about before doing anything drastic, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Just what's the smallest thing? What's the lowest hanging fruit? What's the thing that feels like it's a slam dunk? It's so easy. And then that's where we want to start.
What things have you seen or heard people do that now you're not just shaking your head, but you're wondering what even led them to think that that was a good thing to do in the first place?
I have seen some really extreme weight loss protocols or diets that, I don't know a ton about them. I've done, very limited research, but things that have somebody eating, 500 calories a day for multiple days in a row. And then you're also trying to work out on top of that. That to me just seems like it's probably not something that's going to be realistic or sustainable or is maybe going to have positive outcomes really in any way. I mean, you might lose weight. I guarantee it's going to be fairly short lived. And so, anytime that I'm seeing, or if a client is like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, to really just kind of have the conversation of, is this something you can see yourself doing for the long term? Do you see potential negative health side effects from something like this? So again, as the coach, I'm happy to kind of share my expert advice or opinion, but usually I like to kind of help guide my clients to discovering those kinds of things for themselves as well.
That's a good way of going about it. But yeah, extreme diets, I don't think are ever going to be good for all of us.
Yeah, no, definitely not if you're looking for like a sustainability factor to
Mm.
it.
I think many of us grew up on the Biggest Loser TV show and seeing those rapid transformations. But yeah, to me, now knowing what I know now, it's like I don't think that's a healthy way to go.
Yeah, and the thing with The Biggest Loser is unfortunately, it was like all of the contestants except maybe a handful of them. I can't remember. I know they kind of went and did some research on where are they now, and a majority of them had gained all of the weight back plus some. And that's usually what you're going to see when you approach lifestyle change from kind of that diet mentality and you're doing the yo-yo stuff, where a lot of times too, people will approach weight loss or, healthy habits with the idea that I'll do this until I reach the goal. And then we think we can somehow go back to living life the way that we were before or eating the way that we were beforehand. And I know that was certainly something I fell into. It was like, okay, well, I want to lose the 10 pounds. I can do this until I get there. And then slowly those old habits or patterns would kind of creep back in, and then the scale would end up creeping back up. So again, it really is thinking like, how do you want to live your life? That's really probably how you're going to want, if the goal is weight loss, then that's how you're going to want to try to lose the weight as well.
Going back to your podcast, do you draw a lot on personal experience for your episodes?
I do. Yes. I find that I share, personal stories or things that I've gone through. You'll hear like a lot of the little snippets of things that are happening with my clients of like, oh, I've been seeing this or noticing this a lot. So I wanted to create an episode kind of around that. So sharing, analogies and things of that nature as well, I think really helps because our brains really like to have those images and those stories.
How has your life changed now that you've got your podcast finally going, all those, 2020?
I mean, it's definitely has helped build my coaching practice out. It has given me a platform to reach so many people that, maybe I would not be in contact with via social media or otherwise. It's opened the door for other opportunities to be guests on other people's shows or, even having brands and things like that reaching out for me to be, some sort of an ambassador or for them to advertise on the podcast. So I think there's a lot of potential opportunity there. it really, in some way, I think too, also feels like it's kind of satisfying a little part of how I was made and wired. As a little girl, I used to set up our huge video camera in our living room, and I would sit behind the coffee desk and I would pretend like I was doing some sort of a news show. And so while this is audio only for the most part, it still kind of satisfies that little bit of, who I was as a little girl and the things that I enjoyed. So it's been fun.
Yeah, you were meant to do this, obviously. You were saying how doing the podcast has led to other opportunities for your business. Did you have those similar opportunities with just your blog, or is it that now you've got the podcast, the world has opened up?
I don't know that I had the same opportunities blogging, but I don't know that that was necessarily because it was a blog versus a podcast. Because, I mean, you can still look out on Pinterest and you see so many bloggers that are, crushing it, so to speak, in terms of brand opportunities and exposure and things like that. I think for me, I really enjoy writing. I've always loved writing. And I think initially I liked bringing that written word to blogs, but like I shared with you before we started recording, I just sort of had this aha that I'm really not sitting down to read a ton of blogs anymore. I tend to work with pretty busy women. They're usually trying to juggle their family, a career, and they're noticing like I also want to start taking care of myself. And so they're not probably sitting down to read blogs either. They're more consuming the audiobooks, the podcasts, and things like that. And so thinking about my clients and my audience, it just seemed like a good shift and a good pivot. Now, I do know that you can repurpose your podcast and turn that into a blog post, which is another great avenue, or you can take a blog and you can turn that into a podcast episode. So there are ways that you are able, I think, to still create two pieces of content with one sort of pillar.
It's very versatile.
Yes. Yeah.
For a podcaster who's just starting out or is maybe in the beginning stages of thinking about starting a podcast, what tip have you learned that you would like to share?
I think you just have to go for it, especially if you tend to be a bit of a perfectionist or kind of a type A and you want to make sure that you're doing it right, that you're putting your best work out there, which I think that's great. But I think sometimes we can get stuck in that and we can sit there and just kind of edit and tweak things until we think it's perfect or good enough to put out there. But really, if you think about the reason why you're podcasting, if it's to serve other people, if it's to impact them, then, B plus work or 70% of the way there is going to be so much more valuable and impactful than something that is perfect, but takes you so much longer to get out there. So for me, that was something, I really had to kind of just release the reins on and just remind myself, when I'm thinking about it being perfect or being good enough, that's usually me thinking a little bit more about myself than thinking about the person that's on the other end waiting to receive the gift of the message that I get to bring.
That's very sage advice there. You can take so long making things perfect, but it doesn't need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a professor in college, and she used to tell me all the time, perfect is the enemy of done. So if you're looking to get it perfect, then you're never going to get it done. If you want to get it done, you have to accept that there are going to be some things that you're going to always think, oh, I could have done that different. I should have said this, or maybe I should have added that. And you just take that, you learn from it, and you grow into that next episode.
You can apply that to the way you eat and exercise too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I do see that a lot with the eating and the exercising is really kind of that all or nothing mindset, right? It's like, if I can't do it perfectly, like if I can't get the full 45-minute workout in, then I'm just going to skip today versus what can I do? Okay, well, I have 10 minutes. This isn't ideal, but 10 minutes is probably like 10 minutes is more than 0 minutes. So if the goal is to be more active, then even 10 minutes is going to be better than skipping the workout for the rest of the day.
So yeah, getting an episode out when it's not highly produced like the ones you hear from Joe Rogan or professional radio stations. it's okay to just do it your way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, up to this point, I still don't have music. Like, I don't have an intro recorded, I don't have an outro recorded. For me, if I'm being completely honest, I tend to fast forward through that anyway when I'm listening to somebody's podcast. So for me, it was like, at some point, I probably will have a more polished and produced show. But again, it's like, if I get stuck in the weeds, then I'm not getting stuff out there. And so for me, I know my practice has been, let's just get the work out there. Let's get out there and serve the people, and we can polish it and I don't want to say perfect it, but make it better as we go.
Do you listen to many podcasts yourself?
I do. I tend to have kind of a rotating list of people that I listen to.
Can you share one or two that are on your rotating list right now?
Yeah. So let me pull up my podcast app here really quick on my phone. So I listen to Food We Need to Talk. I like that one. I like their perspective. They do a lot of episodes around exercise and nutrition and different things like that. And I really like the perspective as it's a non-diet approach as well. It's more the lifestyle medicine aspect. One of the business podcasts that I listen to, well, I just started listening to it, is called Business Made Simple with Donald Miller. He's the guy that wrote the book and has the whole story brand thing for marketing. And then I will typically listen to like a sermon or something like that as well. So I try to hit one in the coaching arena to help me kind of hone my craft as a coach, one business focused podcast to help me grow my business, and then one is a little bit more kind of to feed and nourish me spiritually.
It sounds like a really good mix of audio to listen to.
Yeah. And I have found limiting myself to like 2 to 3 a day is good, because otherwise it's easy to just get into consumption mode and then you're never actually creating anything.
Mm. Yeah. The podcasts I listen to are also an eclectic mix. There's some that help me with my podcast or, business podcasts. Oh, there's also fun ones that are about my hobbies.
Yeah. I have been trying to branch out a little bit more into things, into shows like that. On our last family road trip, I tried to do one of the kind of the true crime ones. I got a few episodes in on the road trip and then I haven't listened to it again. So
Save it for the next road trip.
yes, I guess so.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Alisha. It's been awesome to have you on and hear about how we can make little baby steps to change the way we eat or exercise to have a bigger impact further down the track.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison, for having me. And I'm excited for your listeners who are thinking about starting a podcast to get out there and get their podcast off the ground. And yeah, I think it really is just about taking the next little step. It's asking, what's the lowest hanging fruit? What can I do today? And just continuing to build on that.
Well, thank you so much. Has listening to Alisha made you think about how you're going to implement any changes to how you exercise or eat? I'd love to hear what you thought about this episode, so feel free to send me an email or a voice message. This year, Women Who Podcast is going to bring you more episodes like this. Plus, also, we're going to hear from experts who can help you grow your own podcast. You can get early access to those in the Women Who Podcast membership. The price is rising January 15, so join now to get ahead of that rise. The link to join, as well as where to find Alisha, is in the show notes. That's it from me this week. I'll be back soon with another episode. You've been listening to Women Who Podcast, the podcast for women with something to say.